Right, got it. Thank you very much, Neil, for your housekeeping information. As always, we are very, very grateful to London South Bank University and to Neil especially for enabling us to do these webinars. But let's get on with what we want to do because time is limited. We only have 1 hour. We have a busy program. So I would like to give the floor first to the COMMEET chair and founder, Jos Hermans, who will do a short introduction. Jos, please.
Yeah, right. Thank you, Martin. Well, dear friends, dear participants, if the sound from my side is not too good, it's understandable because I'm sitting in open air in the south of France, in the sun, and in the famous Mistral wind, which is blowing around my ears. So excuse me if you can't hear me too well. I try to speak loud and well. I'm very happy to meet all of you on the occasion of this webinar on addressing racism. You know, the COMMEET Fellowship is very proud to announce the development of its new anti-racism toolkit in its final stages. During the last 12 months, a dedicated team of colleagues from in and outside our fellowship has been busy developing this manual. It can be used by all communities anywhere in the world that want to fight unwanted developments in racial behavior in their own home region. And we hope this toolkit can find its way to many desks, homes, and NGOs that are interested in using it in their projects. And we will be happy to send you this toolkit for free as soon as it is ready. And we will also be happy to receive a lot of feedback from your side on its usability. In case you have any questions when using it, a contact point will be available to support you. Well, to conclude with, COMMEET's vision is that the world will be a better place if people are empowered to take the responsibility for their future into their own hands. With offering you this anti-racism toolkit, we hope to empower and enable you to tackle one of the most serious problems of our time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jos, for this introduction. As you may have noticed, COMMEET is developing a toolkit on how to address racism, and that's what the theme of this webinar is all about. The toolkit will hopefully be ready in the next couple of months. We have 3 people from the toolkit writing team here who will be asked questions, and we start with Rhonda Rosenberg of Saskatchewan, who is the executive director of the Multicultural Council over there, and she will be making a presentation on 4 different types of racism. After her presentation, I'll be taking 2 panelists through a series of questions that they will answer, and after that we will have about 15 minutes to ask and answer questions that you may have. So I would like to start with Rhonda. Rhonda, please, can you start your presentation?
Definitely. Thank you, Martin. I'm just going to get it in full screen here. Thank you very much. And yeah, as we mentioned, Roger Petrie is not able to be with us today, but he is the person that has had longer term COMMEET involvement and invited me to be part of this toolkit creating committee. I am the executive director of the Multicultural Council of Saskatchewan, and this is a very short introduction to anti-racism and the ways that we see it. I want to begin by situating myself as a person of Eastern European origins, and my grandparents and great-grandparents in some cases came from there and moved to Ontario, but I now live in Saskatchewan. As you can see, there are treaties that govern the relationship between First Nations people and originally the British Crown, kind of through there with the Government of Canada. I am meeting you from Regina in Treaty 4 territory. We also have Métis peoples, such as a unique culture that originated on these lands in Western Canada. And I join you from Western Region 3 of the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan. We are relevant. The reason I share this with you in this international context is because our greatest work at the moment in anti-racism work is looking at colonialism and the deep impacts that it has across all of the forms of racism that I'll talk to you about. So first of all, and part of the reason why we wanted to do this like brief presentation before our panel conversation is to get us kind of on the same page about what race and what racism are. Race is not biological. There are, of the 100% of the human genome, 99.9% approximately is in common across humanity. The 0.1% that there are differences between us as human beings, that's where there are differences, and 6% of that, so 0.006% of our genetic makeup are the genes that determine the things that we associate with race. So things like skin color, hair color and texture, facial features, eye shape, eye color, to some extent physical build, those kinds of things. It's a minute amount. And so when we think about race, it is an inconsequential amount of biology that really determines what race is. And certainly none of that determines human intelligence or function in any way. So if not biological, what is it? We talk about race as a social, economic, and political construct. You'll see the title says social construct. It's long been talked about in that way by the UN since the 70s, certainly. But I've also come to really see that the social, economic, and political are really bound together for a purpose. It's used to differentiate between groups of people in order to privilege some and oppress others. Through the oppression of others, really. And so we're very aware that through the processes of colonialism in previous centuries, but continuing today, that race was used as a concept to justify extraction, exploitation, and oppression of both lands and people. So this is why racism is very much relevant today, where biologically we can see it's not so relevant, but except for the visual cues that we use to understand it. Everyone can carry racial prejudices, and we all absorb these in terms of stereotypes, from our own experiences, from our being able to see how we are oppressed. We can all carry prejudices, but when we talk about racism, we talk about racial prejudice plus power, plus some access to making a difference, either in our own lives as well as in other people's lives. So we can really see like it is about some people being privileged by racism through the oppression of others, and continuing to re-entrench and exacerbate the hierarchies and differences in access to economy, social status, and political voice. So we have really come to talk about 4 levels of racism. And really often we think about racism, I'm going to start at this level here, the interpersonal level, because very often when we think about racism, we think about, well, that is about one person treating another person badly, whether through calling them names, not giving them a job, not being willing to rent an apartment, telling jokes. That is very much at the interpersonal level. And we tend to think about racism as being intentional and conscious. What we know is even at the interpersonal level, that it very often is neither intentional nor conscious. It can range from the very subtle very like small microaggressions, can I touch your hair, to violence at that interpersonal level. But that our interpersonal interactions are very much influenced by the structures that we live in that for most of us have racism embedded in them. In the case of Canada, where I live, it's very much white supremacy that is part of the hierarchy that is accepted, and that so many of our systems and institutions continue to perpetuate and entrench in the ways that we daily experience our lives. So that's the structural racism is very much about hierarchy. And we know that racial hierarchy is not the only hierarchy. There's also gender, sexuality, faith, income, humans over nature. Those kinds of hierarchies are also playing in our structures. And we'll get to that when we talk a little bit about intersectionality. So the structures are very much there. A lot of our ideas and stereotypes come from these structures, and we don't necessarily know where they've come from. They're things that we have come in with our breath as we've grown up. And sometimes things we clearly learned, but sometimes we've simply absorbed them by osmosis, and those are then become played out in the policies, programs, processes of our systems, our institutions, and the institutions may be public institutions like schools and healthcare systems. They might be private businesses and corporations. They may be nonprofit community-based organizations as well. So we see the kind of systemic and institutional perpetuation of hierarchies and ideas, and willingness to exploit some for the benefit of others, playing out through systems and institutions. And as I talked about interpersonal before, where do those ideas come from about who it's appropriate for me to rent my apartment to, or for my children to date, or for me to treat poorly when I meet them in social situations versus the people that I treat with respect? Those come from those structural ideas that permeate our societies. Also from the same places, actually from all of those places, we internalize the ideas. We internalize the ideas that are in that racial hierarchy about ourselves. And so for those of us who are racialized as white, we often internalize superiority, and it is our essential, important work to catch ourselves when we find ourselves thinking or behaving in ways that are that reinforce those ideas of superiority. For people who are racialized in other ways, as Black, as brown, as Indigenous, as Asian, there are so many different ways that we're racialized. And I want to say here that the ways that we're racialized change over time and context. So my background is Jewish, and for some people today, and certainly in many situations in my life in the past more, that Jews were considered their own race. And people who identify as white supremacists would still identify me as that, a separate race. But in my life in Saskatchewan, I walk with white privilege. And so I consider myself racialized as white here. But for people who are racialized into oppressed groups, that there are often many stereotypes that people find themselves choosing between, living out stereotypes, fighting against them, often self-sabotaging. We talk about lateral violence, where people are sabotaging each other, cutting each other down, rather than supporting each other to do well. Accepting cultural norms from the dominant society and rejecting their own cultures. There are many, many ways that internalized racism plays out, which are really destructive and again reinforce the whole system of racism. And then, as I said, I wanted to talk for a moment about intersectionality. So obviously, so it still says ethnocultural heritage. Our racial, the ways that we're racialized is only one of the ways that that there are hierarchies, and that there are folks with privilege and folks who are more oppressed and folks somewhere in the middle. I like this wheel model. If that little P in the middle is, we consider that our axle, it's a very well greased axle. So if you carry privilege along any of these spokes, you are, think of yourself, think of it as facing inward. You're centered, and as the wheel rolls around, things are relatively easy. And the more ways, the more spokes, and you could have many more spokes than these, the more spokes in which you're privileged, the easier life is. Whereas the more spokes in which, when you are oppressed on any of these spokes, as the wheel rolls around, what's happening down here? You're getting squished. And so the more parts of our identity in which we find ourselves close to that oppression edge, the more ways that, the more often and the more, the deeper that we're getting squished down. Life is harder. So, and we're also, like, if you think of everyone, no matter where they are. So I would say, let's look at the gender one. So we'd say people who have a cis male identity, identify male at birth and still continuing to identify as male, are probably the most privileged along the gender identity. I keep losing my cursor. People who are trans would be on the outside here. For myself, as cis female, I'd be somewhere in the middle. So you can be anywhere along the spoke. It can change at different times of your life and in different contexts. But the idea of intersectionality is that the more that you're identified in carry identities that are oppressed, the more difficult life will be. The more identities that are closer to privilege, the easier things are going to be more often. And that's a very brief description of intersectionality, but I know what's the other thing I was going to say is we could also look at it as center and periphery, where people are, for the most part, facing inward. So even if you are carrying, say you're trans and you're closer to the margins on the gender spoke, you're quite aware of what it looks like to carry privilege. Whereas when you carry privilege, you may be quite unaware of what it looks like and feels like to be further out towards the oppression edge of this wheel. And with that, this is my contact info for anyone interested. And I want to say thank you, and I'm going to turn it back to Martin to move on with our panel.
Right, thank you very much, Rhonda, for this very, very insightful explanation of the various types of racism and how basically everybody is affected by it, unless you happen to be right in the middle of your wheel. Then you're in a lucky position, aren't you? Yeah, but yeah, let's get on with the questions to the panelists. We have Tembeka Dambuza from South Africa, who is teaching and is doing research into overcoming prejudice and racism at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. And we have our good friend Siegfried Janzing, who is from the Netherlands, but who lives in Portugal at the moment. He was the director of the Regional Archive of Middle Holland and a director of a museum in Nijmegen, if I'm not mistaken. He is a Bangladesh expert, and he is also one of the most active fellows in our COMMEET fellowship. The first question I would like to ask both of them, and please be aware that you only have 5 minutes per answer to your question. After 5 minutes, I will have to cut you short. So try and keep within the 5 minutes limit. The first question I would like to ask to ladies first, obviously, so to Tembeka, can you tell us what racism looks like in your community? Tembeka, I can't see you anywhere at the moment. not on my screen.
I think she appears to have dropped off the call.
Let me see. What maybe we can move over to Siegfried then. And Siegfried, can I ask you to answer that question, please?
Can you hear me well? Because my connection is extremely bad. But anyway, I will try to answer the question: what does racism look like in your community? And for this question to answer, I took first of all 2 books from my bookshelf, and I will show you the 2 books which I am taking from my bookshelf. It is the one from Rennie Eagle-Lodge, Why I'm No Longer Talking with White People About Race, and White Fragility from Robin DiAngelo. And quite funny that these 2 books, white and black. But anyway, I took the 2 books to face some kind of discomfort for myself, because that is the answer what I'm looking for and what I am seeing in the community, which I'm talking about is Gouda at the moment, although Martin told me I moved to Portugal, that's right, but I'm still involved in the community of Gouda for project work. And the lack of racial discomfort is what racism looks like in this community. Unawareness and the daily easy living modus I look to prevents a critical examination of your white identity, which is extremely needed to get steps forward. And when I am looking into Rennie Eagle-Lodge's book, Why I'm No Longer Talking with White People About Race, I have small words to read about it. And that is, I will cite her for a moment. I write, she writes, I write to assure myself that other people have felt what I'm feeling too. That it isn't just me, that this is real and valid and true. I'm only acutely aware of race because I have been rigorously marked out as different by the world I know for as long as I can remember, although I analyze invisible whiteness and ponder its exclusionary nature often, I watch it as an outsider. I understand that this isn't the case for most white people, and she's right, who move through the world blissfully unaware, that's important, blissfully unaware of their own race until its dominance is brought into question. Well, etc. She names blissfully unaware. To be white is to be human, itself, and invisible whiteness. And this is what racism looks in my community, in the community of Gouda. And probably this is the way how it is seen in many small towns in the Netherlands. So you feel actually insulated from racial stress. So you don't need to act and to think about yourself, how you are moving in the community. No racial discomfort. And it's quite interesting that Robin DiAngelo mentions this as white fragility, because if you have no critical, if you have no need to be critical of yourself, you become fragile. And that fragility, that's quite interesting. She names that as the core problem of our position in society. You are becoming fragile. Well, I remember, to finish this question, I remember behavior of silence, a behavior of silence. Once when I met, when I was in a white progressive community, and there entered a person of color entered in that community. The community is called Gouda Bruis, the very active community in Gouda. And she asked her, am I here the only person of color tonight? And what was the reaction? The reaction was none at all. It was silence, complete silence. And that was an unbearable silence. It explains exactly how racism is actually in our community. Silence, silence, silence. So that is what I wanted to tell about this question.
Right, thank you very much, Siegfried. It's very telling. This silence thing, I think, is very telling about how white people especially feel about racism. You don't want to admit that you are being racist. And I think everybody, all white people, tend to be racist every now and then.
Yeah, but the silence keeps racism in the actual. So that's the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Tembeka, can I go over to you with the same question? Can you tell us what racism looks like in your community, please? Tembeka, are you there?
Yes, I am. Good afternoon, everyone. Greetings from a cold and wet Pietermaritzburg in South Africa. When the weather is like this, the network is usually a problem. So that's why I disappeared briefly earlier.
Now you're allowed.
Thanks very much for, thank you. Thanks for allowing me to be part of this discussion. And thanks to Jim, who introduced me to the toolkit. Jim Taylor, who's also here in the group. I think in my community, I would say that racism is anger. Anger at feeling and knowing and recognizing that we are not being treated the same. We don't get the same privileges. We don't get the same opportunities. But also sometimes anger that if we think back to what Rhonda said, some of it we even miss. We don't recognize it as racism. It comes out sometimes as a favor. I'll make an example. One of the ladies in my circle of friends moved to a new office and was given a toilet for her sole use. And she was very excited. She says, sure, I've made it in the world. I have my own toilet. And it was only later that she realized that the reason she has her own toilet is because the other staff don't want to share a toilet with her. So it is racism that comes packaged in a different way that one doesn't always recognize at first. And this is why I say in my community, there's a lot of bitterness, there's a lot of anger because of the experiences that the community has had.
Yes, I can see that. I can see that. It makes...
Stop there.
Sorry, had you finished your answer? Or did I interrupt you?
Yes, I will stop there with that one example, but maybe I'll be able to share more as we go along.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much. I can understand, I can fully understand that this sort of thing makes you very, very angry. And it is good to hear this kind of thing from you and from other people who suffer from racism. Let's get on to the next question then. Siegfried, can I turn to you again? Can you give us a concrete example from your experience?
I have two examples, and already mentioned one of the silence of the community. So that the progressive community. So I will not repeat that, but it's interesting to say one more thing about that. That racism is a system in which you are socialized, and they found it a weird thing that they were classified like that. So I think what D'Angelo says in Avoid Fragility is that the progressive community, yes, that's literally what she says. So the progressive community caused the most daily damage to people of color. That's already a very big thing for me, because I think myself of the progressive community, so that's quite a shock. But she is right. The progressive community is the group that caused most daily damage, because they are the fragile group. But let me go on with another example of 1 July, the celebration of Ketikoti for the first time in Gouda. Ketikoti marks the date when slavery was abolished in the Dutch colonies, and it was for the first time celebrated in the community of Gouda. Normally in the Netherlands, it's celebrated in the big cities of Amsterdam and Rotterdam. For the first time, it was in Gouda, and it was a big thing because the Dutch television was there, etc., etc. But what happened? A very curious thing happened. It was celebration this year, the celebration of Gouda, 750 years of city rights. So it was a big historical year. And in this year, Ketikoti was celebrated, and it turned out to be a showcase of tolerance of the city of Gouda. So you can imagine when a celebration of this is turned into a showcase of tolerance instead of the pain of the descendants of slaves, well, then we have an utmost example how actual racism is still in society, structural racism is a part of society. And I felt bad about it because I was the organizer of this event. And during the organizing this event, descendants of of slaves told me, you are doing the wrong thing because you are focusing on tolerance. So you can see, I felt bad, very bad. But I had to bring it to the end. So I brought it to the end with a bad feeling. But this is what's happening when we are not aware of the pain and the fact that we are the privileged group. So this is the set example. Turning back to you, Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Siegfried. So it seems to me that this was an example of white people, privileged people, excusing themselves and not having any ears for the suffering that they have caused, or that white people in general, Dutch people in general, caused in the past. Is that the correct interpretation?
Yes, I missed something of your words because I had some failure.
Oh, I see. So the Dutch people in the past caused a lot of suffering in the colonies, especially, obviously. But apparently, in this particular example, they had no eye for that. They did not see what they did.
Exactly.
They did not see the pain that they've caused.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
It was focusing on the tolerance of the city of Gouda as a city of tolerance, but not about the pain of the descendants of slaves.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. It is painful to hear that, isn't it? If I can turn this around a bit. But anyway, let's return to Tembeka, please.
Specifically because
sorry, Siegfried, your sound is very bad now.
You can imagine, you can see how I'm feeling. Still.
The connection, your connection is at the moment is rather bad, so we can't hear you very well. So
Siegfried, it might help, Siegfried, if you turn your video off, and sometimes the sound improves after you do that.
To take away, to stop my, okay.
Can you now say something?
I took away the video.
We don't see you anymore. We hear you.
No, I am still there, but I took away the video.
Yeah. And your sound is clearer now.
Okay.
So unfortunately, we have to do without your face, like Neil Hudson said, your lovely face, because I only see lovely faces here. But we know what you look like now, right? So Tembeka, can I return to you with the same question, a concrete example, another concrete example, because you already gave us a concrete example from your experience? Tembeka, can you hear us, please?
Sorry, yes, I can hear you. I can hear you. Another example, I think that perhaps it's important to note that I am speaking from an experience of a Black South African who still whose life still has reflections of the old apartheid legislation, policies, maybe the structure that Rhonda talked about also earlier. One of the problems and issues that we have, for example, is in terms of service provision. If you call an ambulance, if you call the police, you're not likely to get that response as quickly as you would get if you were somewhere else. And that is perceived in the community as, again, a perpetuation of racism. Because although policies have changed in paper, in reality, in practice, some things are still the same. In the past, Jim and myself could not sit, for example, in the same cinema. If we did, we would sit in different places and using different doors. In some places in our country at the moment, that situation still exists, but it is now being hidden so well that it is not easily recognizable. So there are still a lot of examples. I don't think I can go through all of them at any given time, but there are many, and many have been documented. I think it is continuing, but in a different way. It is continuing in an underhand way, and it is being disguised. So, for example, another example, with colleagues, we attended a workshop, and I think you all know about group photos. So there were about 6 of us. We were called by the photographer. We took a photo, and the photographer specifically moved me to one side of the photo at the end. I didn't see anything wrong with that. He's rearranging us. The following day, these days of digital technology, the following day, the photos are there. And I noticed that I'm not in the photos. And yet I know that I was in the workshop. I'm still in the workshop. And then you ask yourself, what is happening here? I thought that these people that I'm with are with me. We are all together. But there are always reminders. There are always reflections of the old legislation, of the old policies, although things have changed. Another example that we have that I'm going to give is our power supplier comes on an annual basis to trim the trees that are interfering with the cables. And they will trim our trees, but they will never clean up. But in the suburbs, when they do come in the white areas, even if it's a black person living in a white area, when they do get to those places, they will clean up after themselves. But we are left with a mess when they finish trimming trees. And because it's your yard, it's your street, it's your cab, you end up having the responsibility to clean it. So there's really a lot of things that are not always in your face, but they still reflect this segregation policy. And in my situation, the biggest has really been black against white, black-white segregation. Recently in South Africa, there have been recordings and incidences being reported of black against black, where South Africans turn against foreigners, other Africans from other countries, where there is competition, for example, for jobs. Then it has resulted in a lot of violence, in a lot of killings, and the xenophobia is also not going away. But to me, that is another form of racism that maybe we are not highlighting because we are focusing so much on the black and white aspect. Mm-hmm. I'm going to stop there for now.
Right, thank you. It's shocking to hear of these examples that still apparently are rife in South Africa. I think everybody knows about this kind of example in their own country, but that is still happening in South Africa when from far away, at least from where we are, we think that things have turned out better than they used to be. But it's really shocking, especially if this happens in a covert way, that we cannot really pinpoint it. So thank you very much for this answer to the question. Then my final question for the two of you, and I would like to turn to Siegfried again. Siegfried, can you think of some barriers and the solutions to the problem? and especially the solutions might be very, very interesting.
Yes, yes, I will. Sorry for the video, which I will not start again. I hope you can hear me well. And I indeed will focus on solutions, because that is what we are. And we have started 3 things. One, that is a series of so-called stadsgesprekken, which is translated in English, city talks or community dialogues. It's a better way to explain it, and I will come back to that. We have established an anti-discrimination platform in our new established museum with many partners, Jewish partners, gay community, colored people, disabled people. Thirdly, we have another way to organize the Ketikoti celebration next year, because then it is 100th end of slavery, a big celebration next year in the Netherlands, and we will come out better than to this year. But coming back to the city talks, which we are trying to organize as a train of trainers program, a new methodology based on 3 things: the change of the mindset and learning skills, and thirdly, how to secure the structure. And some components of this methodology is in the drafting, taking care of the diversity, how to invite people, and rules for walking for a very important thing in the toolkits we are making for COMMEET, and how to start. Secondly, we're burning platform and to create a good vibe and good feeling. Also, which is also a thing in the toolkits, and I'm mentioning it because these city talks, the methodology has many components of the toolkits. The 4th component is taking
Can you repeat that, please, Siegfried? Can you repeat the 4th component, please, because we couldn't hear you.
Yes, the 4th component is being aware of exclusion, feeling that exclusion is a daily business in daily life. Be aware of that. So that's the 4th component, exclusion. 5th component is games, introducing games, and the games specifically focusing on changing perspective. So it is not just fun, it's changing perspectives, very smart games. The 6th component, how to transform yourself into an ally. What roles do you take? What responsibility do you want to take? So becoming active. Then starts an interactive dialogue. That's the 7th component of this stadsgesprek, city talks. Finally, the closing session by interactive spoken word, that kind of things. And we are organizing this in 3 returning. It is not only once, but we are returning 3 times we are doing this for the whole year, and then to document the results in the society. To secure it, we had, as already mentioned, established that platform, that anti-discrimination platform will be for securing the results of this train of trainers program. And the effect will be used in the organization of Ketikoti next year. So then is the whole circle complete. And for me, important is in this trajectory to include the toolkit which we are making, because the toolkit, I consider the specific importance for learning the skills. We have the mindset, the skills, and the structure. So the part, in my opinion, specifically important for the skills, how to act. Well, this is what we are doing, and I will be happy to, in a later stage where we have another meeting, to tell you more about the results, which I cannot say because we have to start yet.
Yes, right. Thank you. It sounds promising if it can all be carried out. So I'm happy to hear that progress is being made and that the view people have of racism is apparently turning out for the better. I can't wait for the toolkit to become ready so that we can, communities anywhere in the world can apply what the practical steps that apparently you are listing in the toolkit.
I need the toolkit, but I'm also responsible for it because I'm in the team, so I push myself.
Yeah, right. Thank you, Siegfried. Tembeka, can I also ask you to identify perhaps some of the solutions that you see to this problem?
Thanks, Martin. I cannot say I'm an expert on this, but in this case, I do agree with Siegfried. I think that the toolkit will really be useful because I do believe that surely racism can be unlearned. So it is something that we have learned that we can unlearn. And I think the toolkit will be very useful in giving us the means in which to use within our communities to unlearn some of the things that we perhaps have learned. I was chatting to Jim this morning and he mentioned something that is very common in my country, but I'm not sure if it is in other areas. And one of the things that we talked about is that we can overcome racism and segregation thinking by keeping in mind a Nguni language expression, which is umuntu, ngumuntu, ngabantu. And what it really means is that I am because you are. We are people through other people. No person lives on their own. And this is the same spirit that was reflected throughout Africa. It was reflected by Mandela, it was reflected by Gandhi, it was also reflected by Martin Luther King. And it is important that we really tune into other people and try and understand other people, understand where they come from, understand what it is that they're about, because that will make us understand better the way they talk to us, the way they respond to us, the way they react. So it is quite important that we are mindful of the language that we use. Sometimes we are not tuned in and we just talk and not even aware that what we have said has actually had a negative impact on someone else. Our thoughts are also quite important, our actions. So it is quite important that we arm ourselves. We have a toolkit that we can use and pull out tools as and when the situation arises, and we use them. It is also, I think, important to recognize that we are all different and we have different perceptions of things. So I think that umuntu, ngubuntu, ngabantu is quite important to recognize that all people are important and they have a space.
I absolutely agree with you. Thank you very much for this answer. I think it's absolutely necessary that everybody anywhere in the world recognizes this and starts acting like this. So thank you very much for this. And we've come to the end of the official program. That is, all the questions that I had have been answered, and I thank the panelists Siegfried and Tembeka very much for their answers. I also thank Rhonda once again for her very insightful presentation. Is there anybody of the participants who would like to ask any of the panelists or Rhonda any question? I don't see any questions that have turned up in the chat box, but I see that Glenn put up his hand. Glenn, who would you like to answer what question?
It's more than more of a supportive comment to Tembeka's last comments about what I understand to be Ubuntu. I thoroughly support what she was saying there, and also would like to juxtapose the idea of I am because you are with the philosophy that underpins lots of Western society and that underpinned a lot of colonialism, based on Descartes, who said, "I think, therefore I am." And it was very much about the individual as opposed to being about the community, which is what the African view of life is. So I just wanted to add that in, really, but also to say that I understand from some African communities that it's interpreted the "I am because you are," and the "you" is not just people, it's all living things, and that takes us into connecting with the natural world that we all depend on, and ecology and so on. So that was all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Glenn. It's certainly helpful to keep that in mind. I think there's still a long way to go before all racism in any shape has left this world, but the sooner the better. I see that Jos put up her hand. Jos,
Yeah.
can I give the floor to you?
Yeah, thank you. My final words today. In the first place, I want to thank Rhonda for this excellent explanation. It opened my eyes. The way she explained this difficult problem was very impressive for me as a relative outsider. Rhonda, thank you. I learned a lot from you today. On the other point is, please keep in mind that the words that the word COMMEET is a contraction of the two other words, come and meet. And that is what we try to do, to come and to meet in the sense of how Mandela meant it. Sit together and be one as a village or as a neighborhood and raise your problem together, because we need each other. So it is my deepest wish that once COMMEET shall be recognized as a true Ubuntu fellowship, and I hope that we will reach that stage once in the future. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Jos. I think we've come to the end of this webinar. Unless anybody has something else to say, please put up a hand or just start talking. Anything is fine with me. I see no reactions, so I think we can just end this webinar then right on time, because we've got a couple of minutes left. Thank you all for being here. Thanks again for Tembeka and Siegfried for answering my questions. Thank you, Rhonda, once more for your wonderful presentation. I think we've all learned from each other here. So let's keep up the good work. Let's continue to fight racism wherever we are, whenever you encounter it. Like Tembeka said, it can be so subtle. It can be so annoying to see that it still happens and nobody is doing anything about it. So yeah, let's hope for a world that becomes better, and let's hope that the toolkits that will be ready in a couple of months will be used widely across the world in all sorts of communities, so that on a small scale people will avoid racism as much as possible. So thank you very much for being here. Thanks again once more to Neil for organizing this and for setting it up. London South Bank University has been extremely helpful over the past 4 webinars, and we'll no doubt return to you. So thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Thank
Goodbye.
you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
See you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.